We've got a lot of people joining us today. So welcome to everyone. We're going to give people about 1 minute to get signed in. So if you're already here, then I'm going to encourage you to find the chat window, open the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from. Thank you. Love to see the coast to coast. Oh boy, it's a fast chat. Wow, I think I saw India. It's a different coast. Wow. Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So this is MindWell webinar. We're delighted to have you join us. We are going to get started in just another 30 seconds here while we have more and more people joining us. We had a lot of registration for this event. I'm Dr. Jeff Soloway. I'm the founder of MindWell and delighted to welcome you to our session today. We've got a really great session that we're putting on in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And we're going to have Jordan join us in just a few minutes. Before we get started, I just want to welcome you and to many of our clients who are participating with today's webinar. MindWell offers evidence-based training in mindfulness to workplaces, and many people tuning in today are MindWell clients, so we welcome them who are joining us, and everybody who's new to MindWell. Thank you for joining. We hope you enjoy today's session and learning a little bit more about MindWell. Well, we really have three distinct priorities at MindWell is to provide evidence-based training. We do this knowledge translation where we offer monthly webinars, as well as we engage in research initiatives looking at the value of mindfulness in the workplace. And today I'm going to let you know about an exciting new initiative that we're doing, a research initiative, and I'm going to invite you to participate in that if you'd like. And I'm also going to offer you the opportunity to take MindWell's core training, the MindWell Challenge. So this event actually knocks off all three of MindWell's purposes to provide evidence-based training, knowledge translation, which is the webinar, and engage in research, which we'll invite you to participate in. So delighted to have you here. We're going to have a very interactive session. We're going to put poll questions at you, and there's going to be a poll question jump up on your page in just a moment. It's going to give you a sample of what's going to happen for you. Here it is. Have you taken the MindWell Challenge? The MindWell Challenge is MindWell's core training program that we offer to organizations. You're going to be able to answer that poll question in real time. Great to see. And if you haven't experienced it yet, again, you're going to get an invite to sign up and take that training. Thank you for filling that out. We are going to have a lot of, we are going to have and invite you to ask questions during our poll, during our session. So if you do have questions come up for myself or Jordan, we encourage you to put them into the chat window. We're going to do our best to respond to them either in real time or save some time towards the end. And we've got people on our team that are going to help to review them and post them up to us. Thank you. Okay, well, before we get started, we like to do a little practice we call Take 5. Take 5 is our mindfulness in action practice. For those of you who have taken the MindWell Challenge, you're familiar with what it is, and I'll be referencing it a few times. In essence, it's inviting us to become more grounded in the present moment. So in this present moment, I'm going to invite you to notice the contact points you have with your feet on the floor, with your chair if you're sitting. Just taking a minute to ground your attention in your chair. Perhaps feel your body sitting up tall, lengthen the spine, feel the breath moving into the body. Feel the breath moving out of the body and just tuning into what's present with you right now. What's present for you in body, perhaps in mind, emotion, and seeing if you can welcome and entertain it all. See if you can welcome whatever's present with you to be with you without trying to push anything away. Taking one more deep breath and exhaling, letting it all go. And for the purposes of our time together in this session, we're going to make our whole session together a mindfulness practice. That means that we're going to keep bringing our attention back into our session. We're going to let go of distractions. There's going to be lots of things popping up on your screen. And as best as you can, close out those other windows or notifications so that you're 100% focused just on here and now. And when other distractions pop up, doing your best to redirect your attention back here and practicing with a mindset of openness, of non-judgment and patience in our session. So that's our practice of mindfulness, and that's how we bring it into action for the duration of our session together. So I'm delighted to welcome Jordan Friesen from the Canadian Mental Health Association. He is the National Director for Workplace Mental Health, and we are delighted to have him join us and to partner with CMHA on this webinar today. Thank you, Jordan, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, I'd love to just do a quick shout out to the teams from your side and to our side, MindWell side, for getting the word out there and all the promotion and marketing so that people found out about this session. And so we're very thankful to your side. I know Alex has been busy with your team and Amanda on the MindWell side. So we appreciate all the efforts so that people are with us today.
Absolutely.
I'd love to get us started, if you can just share a little bit about yourself, Jordan, and your background and the background of your work with this association.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a little bit about me. For starters, I'm from Manitoba, so I know everyone else added theirs to the chat, so now you know where I am. I've been with the Canadian Mental Health Association now for a total of about 5 years. The last 3 years really focused on workplace mental health, and my background is in occupational therapy, and I sort of obsessed with figuring out how to best match up the people that are trying to do work with the work that they have to do and where they need to do it, and creating an environment that actually supports all of us to function really well. And that's been a core philosophy of my education and my occupational therapy practice, and the work here with CMHA is really, I think, just an extension of that. And my work is really focused on from an employer perspective, how do we create environments that support mental health for all workers in Canada? And we talk a lot about psychological health and safety, education, training, leadership. It's a pretty wide swath, but in particular, mindfulness is something that's of interest to me, and why I'm really excited for our time today, Jeff. I've dabbled in practicing mindfulness myself at times of high stress. In my life, it's been a really useful practice for me, and something I try to go back to as often as I can to keep myself grounded. So that's a little bit about me, and a little bit about how I got to where I am. I know someone commented on my button here. I think we probably have a few Not Myself Today clients on the call today, and so that's one of the programs that I'm quite intricately involved in, and I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing with Not Myself Today. And obviously, I think it connects well with concepts related to mindfulness too.
Yeah, we're really delighted to talk more about that and look at the intersections in between our work. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing and hearing about mental health in the workplace since the start of COVID-19.
Yeah, well, I would say that what I've been hearing is, a mixed bag. One is that I'm encouraged employers are paying attention to the issue. If they weren't before the pandemic, they certainly are now. And so I hate to say that, there's a silver lining in a pandemic, because I would rather have not had this experience collectively. But I think the one positive coming out of it is that, employees are more willing to share when they're having challenges with their mental health. I think there's a wider recognition that mental health is something that we all have and we all need to look after. And so that's been good. But also at the same time, I think a lot of challenge from employees and employers. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with trying to shift the way you're working, especially during this time. And I think a lot of my discussion with both of those groups is around acceptance. And so accepting that there are a lot of things right now that are out of your control, accepting that you're maybe not feeling 100%, and that's okay right now, and accepting that you're maybe having some difficulty being motivated and balancing all these different aspects of your life, and we don't have it all together. And that's been a common thread throughout all of the conversations, is just, I think, accepting that this is a process, this is a trying time, this is impacting all of us in many different ways, and that cultivating a level of acceptance is a helpful practice right now.
Acceptance, and acceptance is a huge part of the mindfulness practice, and really coming to experience acceptance on multiple levels, because it's, as we can accept what's here, it helps to bring us more present.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts too, Jeff. Like, you're connected with many organizations, companies, employees as well. I mean, what have been some of the common themes from your end?
Yeah, well, I kind of echo some of the reflections that you've made in terms of raising awareness and all, and this has really pushed mental health to the forefront. And if people weren't paying attention to it before, they're definitely paying attention to it now. I'm just going to pause here for a second, Jordan. We're hearing some comments that to speak up, or maybe bring our microphones a bit closer to us, so that the volume is a little bit louder.
How's that?
I think that sounds a little bit. We'll do our best to speak a bit louder. Yeah.
Better. Okay, great. Hey, look at
that. Immediate feedback.
I love it.
Immediate feedback. Yeah, I think that there's this opportunity, like you're saying, and we'll get into a little bit more, that to revisit kind of culture and how people are being and how we're working together. So there's been such a disruption to everything, daily life, that it kind of everything is starting afresh. So for that perspective, I think there is an opportunity that it's shaken us out of the status quo.
Yes.
And now we have an opportunity to revisit what is the new normal.
Yeah, exactly. I think let's think critically about what changes we've been able to make. Some, I think, for the positive as a whole, and let's try to bottle those and hang on to them. Because you're right, in any landscape shift like this, there's going to be a lot of change, some great, some not so great. And what I've been challenging my team to start thinking about is, what are some of the things that they want to hold on to, that they've maybe rediscovered, or that they've been able to embrace in light of this massive shift in the way we do things. So I definitely don't want to lose that. And I think that culture shift ties in with a lot of that as well.
Right. So we're all waking up in some new ways because we've been so disrupted. And I think more will start to unfold as to these points as we kind of continue our conversation. I know one of the things that we're just talking about is raising awareness around mental health. And I know this is a big part to the work, not myself today, and learning the basics. This is kind of a fundamental principle of that program. Maybe you want to speak a little bit more about how you do that, or what's the role
Yeah.
that it plays in the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So within Not Myself Today, we have really 5 core pillars of learning. And the first one we talk about is learning the basics, right? And I think this comes from the understanding that in order for us, as employees, as employers, to address mental health and mental illness effectively in the workplace, we all need to have a common understanding of what we're talking about. And in that is this often misunderstood term, mental health, right? And we confuse it all the time with mental illness. And it doesn't help that there are a lot of other terms that we use to sort of navigate the gray zone in between, right? Mental health problems, mental health issues, mental health concerns. But very fundamentally, what we want employers to start with is understanding that mental health and mental illness are different. In fact, we all have mental health. We say at CMHA that 5 out of 5 Canadians have mental health, while 1 in 5 Canadians every year are going to experience a mental illness. And so, what we want to do when we talk about learning the basics as sort of a fundamental component of shifting culture in the workplace is bringing everyone to that common understanding, help breaking down some of the misconceptions, stigma, and then also allowing people an opportunity to maybe reflect on ways or perhaps stereotypes that they've held about this topic, or things that have, on their end made it difficult for them to engage in, learning or candid discussions about their mental health. So, the idea here is that we really want to be able to break down some of those barriers to addressing mental health issues and mental health broadly in the workplace. And to do that, first, we all need to have the same language, and we all need to have a really core fundamental level of mental health literacy. And so that's really what learning the basics is about when we talk about that pillar of knowledge building.
Got it. And it's interesting because within Mindwell, we don't our core training at present doesn't talk explicitly about the fundamentals about mental health. But what it does is it starts to give people this first person experience of their own mental health and exploring what mental health feels from the inside and through different experiences of and principles. And what we've done is I was curious about this because we included it in a survey last year where we were asking, are people's level of literacy of mental health enhancing through this program, even though we don't teach explicitly about it? And the overall majority were saying yes to that. So it's an interesting way to learn about mental health by learning about one's own experience of the mind and some principles about, wow, my mind is constantly busy and it's going all over the place. And this is normal. This is kind of the nature of the mind. And talking about like this voice in my head and normalizing this voice in my head because we don't talk about it. And when we become more comfortable or familiar with it, I think it helps us appreciate this notion that we all have mental health.
That's exactly it. And so part of it, like you've said, is knowledge of what it even means to talk about mental health. But then some of that innate understanding really does come from really intentional reflection and even building awareness of what's going on in your own head. Because we don't often focus there. Unless we're really trying to. It's easy to focus externally. It's a lot harder to focus internally. So, within the learning the basics content that Not Myself Today provides, one of the key mechanisms that we use to help sort of start that reflection is what I'm wearing right now. Is we call them mood buttons, probably more accurately referred to as emotion buttons. But even the simple act of taking a pause and actually thinking consciously about how you're feeling is one step in the right direction to helping you really understand what we're talking about when we mean mental health.
Right. And that kind of moves us into one of the second pillars about how are we feeling, which is
I see what
about
you
working
did
with
there. I see
emotions.
what you did there.
Bringing up working with emotions.
Yeah. So that's the second piece.
Let's see if we can pull up our next poll question here, Amanda, around which of these are not considered to be a key category of emotional intelligence skills before we talk about it too much.
Perfect. Hey. So this is an example of, one of the ways that we, through Not Myself Today, we actually try to assess and provide feedback to employees and to companies around knowledge gaps within their workforce. So we have a whole ton of questions that tie into each of these pillars of learning that employees have the opportunity to try to answer and sort of improve their score over time. So we, anyway, this is one of the questions, and I guess we'll see how people do.
Yeah, let's see if we can. We've got about 40%, 30%, 39% are at sympathy. About 20% self-regulation. Close to 40% is motivation. Share the results here.
Hey. Ooh. Okay, fantastic. So if you were in that 40% sympathy, correct. Nice job. Nice job. So emotional intelligence, I mean, there are a number of different ways to categorize or describe the things that make up our emotional intelligence. Sympathy is not typically considered one of those elements. The rest are, depending on which author you're particularly referring to. So when we talk about working with emotions, what we're really talking about is, in some ways, builds on our emotional intelligence and how that plays into the way that we work, the way we interact with others in the workplace, and is really an intention of building awareness of your own emotions, your own emotional states, how you react emotionally to situations, and then also, importantly, building your ability to express empathy and understand how other people might be feeling. Um, so that's where we focus our second pillar of learning is really around emotional intelligence, and we also include mood management within there as well. So being aware of what your moods are, how they fluctuate, how that relates to your emotional state in a moment-to-moment basis, and providing people with practical strategies that they can use to try to either track or manage their moods, and then also hopefully build their emotional intelligence.
And I think there's a lot of commonality here in what Mindwell is working to do, and through its practices of Take Five.
Mhm.
Definitely, we're trying to develop emotional intelligence, and I feel like one of the core aspect of the work that we do in workplaces is trying to develop the skills of mental health and develop the
Yeah.
skills of emotional intelligence by learning to uh, adapt and incorporate this new practice. So one of the of
Mhm.
Take Five, and that's really one of the core learnings that we try and do is for people to um, make a habit of a practice of Take Five in their life,
Mhm.
a practice where they can kind of pause, they can turn in, and they can check in with their emotions. Because I often I often think, there's Jeff when he's having a good day, and then there's
Mhm.
Jeff when he's not having a good day. And my emotional intelligence really can sway depending on my level of awareness, my level of stress, and so my ability to regulate my emotions and to bring my
Totally.
kind of temperature down is huge. And that's part of like what I do to prepare for each day and what I can
Mhm.
do in the moment to regulate myself.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I think there's also this, from a mental health or even from a mental health condition or illness perspective, there's this connection between the emotional states that we find ourselves in, and sometimes the ways we think and the ways we act. And I think, important part of learning to manage your mood and manage your emotions is to try to put some distance between your emotional reaction and how you choose to respond. I think that's where mindfulness can really play a huge part, is putting that distance and that pause between how you're feeling and how you choose to respond, because ultimately you do have a choice, and being governed by those emotional reactions can sometimes lead to really unhelpful behaviors, or ultimately difficult situations, and especially in the context of the workplace, when you're always dealing with other people, right? That's what the work environment is. It's a connection of social relationships. So how you choose to respond in the workplace has a huge impact, not only on yourself, but on other people that you touch, and how their mental health is impacted as well.
Right. And just to give people a bit of context, the reason why we feel that mindfulness is such a powerful practice is because it's preparing us to add in this gap before we react. And if you think about like a mindfulness practice, some people think, oh, you're sitting around doing nothing. Maybe you're closing your eyes, focusing on your breathing. This is a lot of nonsense. And what value does this really have? But what it's doing is, and what you're practicing is, when you're sitting there, and we can all do this together, and maybe you've had this experience, is that when you're sitting kind of focusing on your breath, life is still happening. You're still being triggered. You can have thoughts about situations and have emotional reactions. And it's in this mindfulness practice, when you're sitting for maybe 3 minutes, 5 minutes, you're able to kind of bring yourself out of that thought, out of that emotional reaction, and back to your attention in the present moment with your breathing and your body. So you're literally rehearsing about letting go from this reactivity, so that when we practice this, we're actually activating different parts of the brain that we can not disassociate, but we can have greater perspective of. And so when we're practicing mindfulness, we're literally activating different parts of the frontal part of the brain, where when we're out of our reactivity mode in the limbic system. And then when we come into action, we're better able to access those networks in the brain. So it's just like our mental strength. It's just like a physical workout. It's our mental workout. And if we strengthen these muscles in a practice session, when we come into the game, real life, in the workplace, we have that strength and we can call upon it more easily.
Totally. I mean, I often talk about it as it sort of it creates the space for you to respond with your emotional intelligence, right? Like it clears the deck, so to speak, so that you can actually tap into the emotional intelligence you have to respond in a helpful and effective way. And I'll be the first one to say, Jeff, that practicing mindfulness is one of the hardest things I have ever done. It's certainly not fluff. It's certainly not easy. It's incredibly challenging, and it might get easier over time, but there's always a challenge to it.
I would always say that mindfulness practice is one of the most difficult things to ask a human being to do, uh, because it's asking people to be still and silent in some cases. Not all the time, but in a formal practice, you're asking the human being to be still and silent. And that's one of the last things a human being wants to be. They want to be
goes against every biological drive we have.
we want to be active and social. And
Yep.
I'm the leading person. Like, I want to be active. I always want to be active. So quieting ourselves to the point to be still and silent is quite challenging. And yet, when we do it, the evidence shows that there's quite a big benefit that we get from it.
Mm-hmm.
So our chat window is exploding with lots of comments, and it's difficult to keep up.
I think I like the one said we should teach mindfulness in kindergarten. I particularly like that, and I know some kindergarten teachers that actually do incorporate mindfulness into their classrooms. So it's starting, which is great.
Yeah, and it's worth. I think it is there. It is coming, and we often talk about mindfulness as a literacy, not so different than reading and writing. It's learning to read the moment. And I firmly believe that this is kind of this new literacy, similar to mathematics, reading, writing, that we are incorporating into our systems of education, because they're critical for success.
They are, yeah, they absolutely are. And I know there's some research even ongoing right now about social and emotional skills, and how quite often they're missing from some of the workforce. And trying to figure out, how do we actually develop these more intentionally? And of course, starting at the primary and secondary school years, but even in adult learners, trying to figure out, because these are the skills of the future. As machines start taking over more of our data oriented work, right? Like it's these human emotional skills that are going to become really valuable to all of us as employees. And I mean, ultimately, as human beings, we could get really philosophical there too. But
Yeah, thank you for all your comments in the chat. And I think people are sharing just experiences where they're seeing it going into the systems of education. I'm personally really passionate about mindfulness and education. That's the area that I did my PhD in 2007. And when I first started my doctoral work at University of Toronto, mindfulness and education wasn't a thing. Like, it didn't exist. There was one program I remember that was starting to work with teachers, and that's what I did my research on, teaching mindfulness to teachers and teacher education. And if you look at it today, there's like handfuls of courses for teachers, lots of curriculums out there being embedded. So it's taking huge strides. And the whole trajectory of mindfulness, just to give you a little bit of, and people who are new to it, to give a bit of context, it really started within healthcare and medicine, and working as a anecdote antidote to stress reduction and chronic
mm-hmm.
pain,
Yep.
and then worked into more mental health, depression, anxiety, education. I would say there was another wave into education, and what we're seeing now is mindfulness in the workplace in the last five years. And so,
Mm-hmm.
with every wave and intersection and integration into new fields, there's so much research being done in all of these fields, and that's what's really driving it forward, is the science behind it and showing the benefits as it's
Well,
being integrated.
and I think it's so cool, just, I mean, to really think about, you would know better than I would, Jeff, the ways in which mindfulness is being applied across so many different areas, so many different populations, so many different treatment modalities. I think it's just, I think, a real testament to the fact that as human beings, to be most effective, we just need to be in tune with ourselves, and kind of that introspective focus. I mean, it's you can call it mindfulness, you can call it, a whole bunch of other things, I suppose. But it comes back to this idea that to be most effective, we kind of need to embrace what makes us human and understand ourselves. And that's something that certainly speaks to me.
Right. And what I'm really passionate about with mindfulness is that it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like sometimes say, and I'd be curious to hear your comments, because I know Not Myself Today includes practices for
Mm-hmm.
developing mental health. And also, I think that there's been a lot of work in the field of mental health for creating awareness about mental health, what it is, reducing the stigma. Where I feel MindWell is a nice fit is that it kind of goes to that next step and really
Yep.
focuses primarily on developing the skills of
Yep.
mental health with a practice of mindfulness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would agree. I think I can speak from the lens of within the mental health sector, and saying that we're doing a pretty good job of sort of reducing the stigma, creating awareness, but we are now at the point where we need to go a step further, and Canadians really need practical tools and strategies to help them preserve, safeguard, and maintain their mental health. And of course, for those Canadians that are experiencing mental illness, we certainly need better access to treatment. But I think the key message here, and I think what you were getting at, Jeff, is that we're beyond just awareness and reducing stigma, although there's still work to be done there. We really need to move into providing people with the practical tools that they need to look after their mental health, and the practical skills. And as you say, like everything you need to do to look after your mental health really is a skill. It's a skill, it's a habit, it's a practice, just like looking after your physical health. And so I think that's an area that, across the board, we're starting to see a shift, but I think more needs to happen. And so I think this is, again, a great example of giving people an opportunity to actually develop a skill that's going to help them preserve their mental health.
There was a great comment from one of our attendees just talking about law schools in Canada, how they're started to have in-house counselors
Mm-hmm.
for employers, and talking about workplaces, should they have this as well. We've actually seen a lot, I've talked to a lot of clients who are providing this type of offerings, and more dollars towards seeing psychologists, mental health professionals. And I think that's an interesting approach, and I think it still balances between kind of prevention and education between and reaction.
Exactly.
And so I
Yeah.
think that there's still work. There is a difference between how do we provide people with education and training that we can all participate in
Mhm.
versus looking for resources that are going to help us kind of solve a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our treatment system in Canada and really much of the world has been focused on just that treatment, right? Downstream, secondary and tertiary in a lot of ways. Where we need to be focusing is prevention and health promotion, and that's going to, I mean, not only apply more broadly across the whole population, but it's also going to decrease the burden downstream, which is really important. So, when we talk about mental health promotion, I think we're talking about, again, developing practices, habits, routines that actually support your well-being, support your mental health. So mindfulness is a great example. There are a lot of CBT skills that I think are really helpful in terms of challenging negative thinking. We talk about a lot in the importance of social connection and meaningful social connection. Again, and that's not something that maybe we necessarily do naturally. It's the theme of our mental health week this year. Is the importance of social connection and getting beyond just saying you're fine. But actually building meaningful relationships that get past that superficial level of interaction. And again, all of that takes work. And teaching people how to do that is, I mean, it's part teaching, it's part education, but it's also just part sort of societal shift. And all of us have an opportunity to role model that.
Do you think stress plays a role in that as well? In our ability to make connections? And I know that's one of the other
Mhm.
pillars of the Not Myself Today program, but it just seems like, stress is this underlying kind of teeter-totter for us in our ability
Yeah.
to.
Well, it absolutely does. And, you can, you hear the words stress and resilience often paired together. And, uh, and, and so I think these are sometimes misunderstood, but the way I like to talk about it is stress is the experience you have in your body and in your mind that disrupts you, right? That pushes you out of homeostasis, so to speak. It dysregulates you, and resilience is your ability to bounce back and to kind of return to that homeostasis and point of equilibrium. Um, and so it's kind of interesting as human beings. One of our natural responses to stress, and actually the foundation for our resilience, is social connection and social support. Resilience is not just a muscle that you build on your own, although there are some pieces that are your responsibility, right? But resilience is ultimately made up of those social connections. So, in most cases, our bodies or our minds are hardwired to reach out when we experience stress, because that social connection is what it can help us bring us back to equilibrium. And so one of the other pillars of learning in Not Myself Today is around how to address stress effectively. And part of it talks about managing your in the moment reactions to stress responses. So we do actually have some mindfulness practices that we include as part of the Not Myself Today program. We also talk about ways in which you can try to pause and reframe things that are happening to you to help mitigate that fight or flight response that you experience. And then we do talk a little bit about building resilience as well. So what are the things you can do to be able to bounce back quicker when stress hits you? And a lot of that comes from building social connection. But again, a lot of it comes back to practice.
It sure does. And people are looking for practical tips, right, for
Mhm.
dealing with stress and anxiety and uncertainty in the workplace, especially during these times. And I think we have to realize that when we're stressed, we're not. I like to say that we're not thinking straight
Yeah.
when we're distressed, because I think I think we know that not all stress is bad. We actually
Mhm.
perform optimally at our best when we have the right amount of stress.
And you just ruined the true or false question we had
I
here. So,
did. I did. Um, and it's that tipping point when we move into distress, and for our ability to recognize when we're stressed. So I think that's a huge thing for us, is just recognizing when we're stressed.
Hmm.
and knowing what type of behaviors that we can take to kind of down regulate. Because when we're stressed, we have this negative bias. Our
Yep.
brains work in a negative bias information
Hmm.
processing system where we see things as negative, and they're not necessarily negative, but because we're stressed, we're seeing negatives all around us. So we're
Exactly.
being fed all of this information. And so, like you were saying, we need to return our bodies back to homeostasis so
Hmm.
we can start to downregulate the stress response, and we can start to see clearly. And a definition that I like to use for mindfulness is our ability to see clearly in order to respond effectively. So
Yeah.
mindfulness is all about seeing clearly in order to respond effectively.
Absolutely. And there was a good question in the chat. Ooh, and now I've lost it. I'm going to pull it up. Sorry, it was such a great question. I want to go back to it. How do you know when your stress level is so high that you need to seek outside help? It's a great question. Thank you, Sandra. Um, and so, what I always talk about is the ability to function. And so, what I would say is that, if you're experiencing stress that is so significant that you're finding it difficult to do the things that you either want or need to do in your day, that's probably a good indication that you could use some help. Um, and so, there are lots of different places you can go for that sort of help. Some of it ultimately is, it's all going to ultimately involve you practicing skills to help manage stress. Um, but that's a great indication that it's a good opportunity to get some professional help and coaching to move you through developing some of those skills.
There's some questions here about rising anxieties about
Mhm.
our current situation and
Yeah.
uncertainty, and maybe it's worth spending a few moments just speaking about that. I know from a mindfulness perspective, it's all about coping with uncertainty. And when some of the underlying principles of more traditional mindfulness is this notion of impermanence,
Mm.
that there's actually nothing that is permanent. And it's a bit of an illusion that we live in this permanent world, because the world is constantly changing. And we come to see that reality more fully through our mindfulness practice, when we can start to witness the moment kind of unfolding moment by moment.
Hmm.
Then we start to see how much it's a changing, and we come to know this truth. So we've lived in this society where it's been, the status quo has been maintained, and all of a sudden we've had this disruption, this significant disruption. So it feels like things are so uncertain, and the mind is so caught up in what's going to happen next and wanting to know what's going to happen next. But if we take a moment to pause, we realize that we've never really known what's going to happen next.
Hmm.
There's been higher probabilities that we knew what to expect, and now that's shifted. So
Yeah.
again, it's a bit of a practice here to pull ourselves out of this stress response and what we would call on the MindWell challenge as thought
Hmm.
trains which take us away. We can get caught up in these thought trains thinking about
I
what's
like
the
that.
future going to hold, what's going to happen next, when am I going to go back to work, when are things going to be normal. We can spend 60-70% of our day thinking and caught up in those thoughts, but they ultimately don't lead us anywhere
Exactly.
productive.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
pulling ourselves back.
And we can think of it. I think another way to think of it is this idea of a locus of control, right? What is the portion of life in the world around you that you do actually have control over? And I think quite often we assume our locus of control is much larger than it really is, because as you said, right, it's sort of the the probability of things going the way we plan is normally pretty high. But if we stop and think about it, again, as you said, nothing is permanent, right? I might not make it. I might not make it to the grocery store today. I could very well get hit by a car on my way there, right? So I think there's an element of recognizing truly what is in your control, and owning that, and then trying to find some level of peace with the impermanence of other things.
Exactly. and that brings us back to that notion of of acceptance and bringing us
Mhm.
back into the here. So we
Yeah.
don't always have to have an answer for things. We don't always have to be feeling good. Coming to acknowledge maybe difficulty, struggle, anxiousness helps to bring us at least back into a bit of awareness and acceptance of what's happening to us right now, and it helps to reduce our stress around the situation. So
Mhm.
we can feel anxious, but we don't have to feel stressed that we're anxious. Uh,
It's an important differentiation right there.
Yeah, I mean, I know what it's like to feel anxious. I know what it's like to like feel butterflies in my chest, and it's not a pleasant sensation. And the notion to sit and breathe with it sometimes doesn't feel like very helpful for myself. But I know that is really the one way that I have to um, to to come to feel it a bit more clear, and then eventually to help release it. So
Mhm.
we've got continue to have a ton of
Oh man, this is great. I know I'm trying to follow all of it, but I can't. So apologies to everyone if you're asking questions that we can't get to. So yeah, and I know someone asked, okay, what are all the pillars again? So first, learning the basics, working with emotions, addressing stress, and then there's two more. And the next one is about building culture. And so the fourth pillar of sort of the knowledge base that we try to build within Not Myself Today is how within a workplace everybody has a role in shaping the culture that you work in, and that culture, we sit in it 8 to 10 hours a day, right? um, and so it's an important consideration in terms of how it impacts our mental health. We've all got a role to play in it, and I think thinking about ways to cultivate supportive work culture is really important. So within Not Myself Today, we talk about things like gratitude, we talk about kindness, we also talk about, generally speaking, principles of psychological health and safety, which is maybe a little bit further afield from the topic today. But those are some of the things that we focus on when we talk about, building a supportive work culture. Um, and Alexandra has just summarized all of our 5 pillars. So thanks, Alexandra. Uh, so that's where we focus within Not Myself Today. I think gratitude in particular ties in very nicely with the topic of mindfulness. And from a kindness perspective, the other thing, and I keep mentioning this in the context of our COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly, COVID-19 is contagious, but kindness is too. Um, and there's a lot of research to back that up as well. So that's where we like to focus.
Yeah, and stresses as well. And we've actually looked at, we're starting to look at some research around mindfulness as well, like in that, if people are practicing mindfulness and on a team, and does that have a contagion effect to other
Mhm.
people around you? I love your comment around culture, because I feel like a lot of the work at Mindwell is trying to influence culture, and we look at this as a culture initiative. We're trying
Mhm.
to develop a more mindful culture in the workplace.
Love
So
it.
yeah, I think we share similar perspectives there, because when we launch Mindwell across an organization, we typically offer it across a year, and we have multiple ways of getting across to people in the organization through webinars, through online training. We've got drop-in classes. And what we're really trying to do is shift a culture. And what we like to say is we try and help people take a step forward from wherever they're at. And
Mhm.
we recognize that not everybody is starting at the same place. Some people are like really open to mindfulness, and some people wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And our approach is trying to help everybody wherever they are on that spectrum to take one step forward from where they were. And that might mean just demystifying this concept of, of mindfulness by the end of the year, and having greater openness to doing it. So
Mhm.
we really try and shift it from individual wellness to organizational learning. That's the approach that we take at MindWell's.
Love it.
Our approach is more of a organizational learning. It's not really individual wellness.
Love it. And I think probably central to that is getting people to talk about their experiences with mindfulness would be my guess, eh?
Yes, and that relates to talking openly.
See, look at us go. Look at us
Yeah,
go.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
exactly it. They're learning a literacy. We have We have so many clients talking about their leaders using Take 5 in meetings. So how do you start a meeting? Starting a meeting with a Take 5, giving people permission to take a moment to regroup, refocus before you're starting in on a meeting. And we've heard large organizations and CEOs starting their executive meetings with a Take 5 practice.
Mhm. You got it, and I think it's sort of bringing it out into the open, making it common, and making those practices, making those conversations actually normal within the context of our workplace. Where we're maybe not used to them being normal, and we think about it in a similar way when we talk about conversations around mental health and mental illness. And the last pillar of our program is around talking openly, and really it's the idea that provided everyone's got a common level of knowledge, that you're more aware of and in touch with your emotional states and how you choose to respond, that you have a sense of how to manage your stress, and you're doing all these things to help shape the culture of your workplace in a different way, that you'll be well equipped to start having some of those difficult conversations in a more intentional, more mindful way. So we tackle things like how to talk to your manager about a mental health issue that you might be having, how to support an employee more effectively. And at the heart of these principles of how to have these open conversations is really this idea that as an individual, it's not always our job to fix. And we focus a lot on the practice of actually just listening and listening for understanding and conveying empathy. Because ultimately, if you're a manager and you have an employee, for instance, who's been diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, you're not necessarily going to be able to fix the problem for them. But an important part of being a supportive manager, colleague, etc., is that ability to put your own agenda aside and actually really be able to listen, and listen intentionally, listen for understanding. And you got to clear the decks of what's on your plate to be able to do that really effectively.
Yeah, listening. A huge application of mindfulness is the ability to bring yourself into the here and now, let go of your wants and desires and busyness, and jumping in and just being fully present to not just hear what the words that the person is saying, but really what's the emotion that the person is saying underneath the words, which is not easy. This is a huge practice of mindfulness that we always refer to. Cultivating is mindfulness in action when listening. We've got I want to mention just for a moment, because we're kind of coming to the end of our time. It's already close to that time. I mentioned off the top that we do have a research project happening. We're collaborating with researchers from the University of Saskatchewan, Memorial University, and we're doing a study with them about people going through the MindWell Challenge. And so we wanted to make this available to everybody on the call today. We'll put a link here where you can actually sign up for the challenge. And once you sign up, you'll be invited to participate in the research. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, we greatly appreciate it. It's a study trying to learn more about individual psychological well-being and behaviors in the workplace. And that just helps us advance our knowledge in this area. So you're welcome to sign up there. As well, if you have any final questions, I know you've probably posted a lot of questions that it's difficult for us to get to, but if there are any last minute pressing questions, feel free to put them into the chat now. And if we don't have a chance to answer it, we will do our best to make a response to them and send it out in the follow-up, because we will follow up with people following this session with a link to highlights from the session.
Yeah, the one I did see that I think it's important to answer is around disclosing challenges with your mental health to your employer, and some guidelines around doing that, how, when, how much, etc. And I guess that's a difficult thing to address in 30 seconds or less. So maybe what I'll just say is that as with many things in life, there are likely pros and cons to disclosing a mental health challenge to an employer. My hope certainly is that, any employer is going to receive it as an act of courage and bravery. But we know that for people with mental health conditions in the workplace, there are pros and cons to that decision, and it is ultimately a personal choice. So anyway, that's a pretty complex topic to get into, but I think I'll say that at least to start.
And I know a lot of people have been, we're all challenged with our new working conditions. And I think it's important, working from home, this blend between personal and professional. My invitation for people is we have this unique opportunity to treat each day almost like we're on meditation retreat. We're all on this giant mindfulness practice together because we've been so disrupted. And this opportunity to look at things a bit more carefully, to work with things a bit more slowly, and just trying to slow down ourselves and what we're doing, and not get too caught up about what's going to happen next. Bringing ourselves back and appreciating the small things in our lives. Maybe we have a bit more time in our day because we don't have to commute. Maybe we have more time to spend with family, eat a meal. Let's really make those times opportunities for practice, of enjoyment, and look for these gifts that we've been given during this time. So it's important to recognize that there are opportunities here, not just challenges. And obviously the underlying to that is some of us have really difficult situations, either health, family and friends dealing with that, or being on the front lines. So that is somewhat of a unique situation. But if we're, I think, coping just with maybe a different setup for ourselves, try and see how we can find new ways of practicing and slowing ourselves down and taking advantage of what can be seen as opportunities.
Agreed. And I think I'll just echo that as a final word from my end, Jeff, is to say that this is a difficult time, but if you can find a change that you've been happy about, or find a change that's been positive, try to remember that, try to carry that forward, try to have that be something that sticks around in your life. And I think if we all try to do that, hopefully we'll be better off together.
We do have worth mentioning another session coming up, Jordan, which is in a few weeks' time, and it's part of our partnership together. And it's focused more on leaders and entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
and also some research that you've done in collaboration with BDO.
With BDC, and no, it's okay. So we studied the mental health needs of entrepreneurs, and no surprise, entrepreneurs, business owners, business leaders are stressed, and I don't think that comes as a shock to anyone. So looking forward to talking about what we found, and then I think, Jeff, getting your perspective on some ways that, in particular, leaders can incorporate mindfulness as a way to help mitigate some of the stress that they're feeling in their lives as well.
Absolutely. So with that, we're going to thank everybody for joining us today. There will be a link in the chat where you can sign up for that webinar coming up in a few weeks' time. We wish everyone a good mental health week. Thank you for taking this time to join us. Once again, thank you to Jordan and his team for everything they've done in creating this event, getting it out to you. And thank you finally to all of you for all of your comments, for making the conversation in the chat probably more enriching than what Jordan and I have been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great. And again, thank you to everyone for participating. It's really great to hear and see so much engagement.
Love to see people from across Canada in one place. So wishing everybody a good day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.